began to colonize, they began to spread out because, like I've already mentioned, the Greek farmland is very poor. So they began to spread out over here into Italy, into Sicily, and over here into Turkey, hoping to find better land. Now, what became important later was when they spread into Turkey. Turkey was called, what is today Turkey? It wasn't called Turkey, it was then called Asia Minor. Asia Minor had been conquered by Persia. And the Greeks encouraged their cousins who had moved out to, hey, rebel against the Persian Empire, and this led the Persians to go in and try to conquer Greece. But that's a little bit ahead of the story, but keep that in mind. Some Greeks did go to Asia Minor and settled down in Asia Minor for a while, where the land was a little bit better. Now, what this did was it spread Greek culture throughout much of the Mediterranean, and a lot of persons still believe that Greek culture was superior to anything else that the people at that time had. Now, you come to a cycle that happened to so many of the Greek city-states. Now, this does not apply to every one of them, and certainly not to Sparta. They would start out with a king. Now, and then after a while, the king would fall out of favor. He'd be replaced by, ruled by one person called a tyrant. The tyrant usually took over in a coup. If the tyrant had killed the king to take over, it's called a coup d'etat. Anyway, the tyrant would take over. Now, let me explain. We think of a tyrant as being a bad person. But in those days, among the Greeks, the word tyrant did not necessarily mean bad. It simply meant a person who was not of royal birth. Now, the kings passed the throne to their sons. But when they decided, well, what if a king has a son who is not capable? What if the son can't rule? So they replaced the king with a tyrant, and the tyrant would rule as long as he lived, as if he could hold on to power. And then when he died, his son would not replace him. They'd pick another man to be tyrant. They eventually got tired of the tyranny and replaced them with oligarchs. An oligarchy is where a few people rule, few people get their heads together. It's almost always the rich. The word oligarch in the Greek language meant rich people. So the wealthier people would get together and they would govern in the absence of tyrant. Then finally, what would come out of this would be a democracy. Now, folk, you've not seen this in your lifetime. I have in mine. Democracies have tended to fail. And most of the democracies in the Greek city-states did fail, including the most famous democracy of all, Athens. Our founding fathers studied Greek democracy and also democracy in Rome. And you might have noticed I wrote the word democracy at the bottom. That's because philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle believed that democracy was the worst form of government there was. And I look forward to the day when it ended. The democracies would eventually be replaced by a one-man rule. Now, as I say, in my own lifetime, I saw this happen time and time and time again in places like Latin America and the Far East. In the Philippines, they were part of the United States. They got their independence from the United States. They formed a democracy. Crime was really, really bad in short order. They replaced the democracy with what we might call a tyranny. Marcos took over. In Singapore, they started off a democracy. It got so bad that if you wanted to go to the grocery store, you better get about 10 men together, and each of you make sure you're armed, and walk to the nearest grocery store, because if you didn't, you'd certainly be beaten up and robbed. Well, Luyan took over. Luyan brought order to the place, and the people loved it. They have not taken back to democracy yet. Luyan resorted to a practice called caning, where a bad person would be beaten with a heavy cane administered by, and a couple of Americans got caned by Luyan's men. Michael Fay being the most famous. Michael Fay never went back to Singapore. Yes. President Clinton, though, intervened a little bit. See, they were going to give Michael Fay six licks, but President Clinton persuaded him to move it from 6 to 4. Michael Fay spent some time in the hospital after being hit by a heavy cane 4 times. Then he left Singapore and never went back. But once back home, he made more trouble again for his family. He learned one lesson: don't make trouble in Singapore. Don't even go there. But in the case of Luyan, I will say this: the bad people did 2 things. They either changed their ways or they left Singapore. Now, the Greeks had same problem. It has been said that democracy will work. It's not just that democracy leads to high crime and lawlessness. To me, it does that too. But someone else said democracy will work until the ordinary people find that they can dip their hand into the public pot and pull out the money therein and put it in their own pockets. Democracy leads to public indebtedness going deeper and deeper and deeper. No king, no tyrant would allow himself to get as deep in debt as our government is now. No king, no tyrant would ever allow it. Oh yeah, we have a debt ceiling. We get to the debt ceiling and we raise it. Get to the debt ceiling, raise it. But we're getting to where our senators and congressmen are less and less willing to raise the debt ceiling. All right. But basically, am I saying, do I think American democracy is doomed? Most democracies throughout history have failed. And we're going to talk in the next chapter how that Rome tried it, and a man took over, one man, Julius Caesar by name, and from that time on, Rome had nothing but emperors. They started off with kings, Rome did. They went from kings to a democracy, and from democracy back to the hereditary emperors. All right. Now, this takes us up to 2 cities, Sparta and Athens. These 2 cities eventually went to war with each other. They were close together, but they had very, very different. They spoke the same language, worshipped the same gods, but they had very different systems of government. When I was young, the United States was fighting a war called the Cold War, not necessarily Vietnam, but the Cold War. I compared the Cold War to the war between Athens and Sparta, with Sparta being the Soviet Union and Athens being the United States. There was one problem with that comparison. In those days, Sparta won. Now, all right, I say Sparta won. In the short run, yes, but fast forward to 2011, Sparta is now nothing but a heap of stones, and there are 200 people living nearby in the mountains who claim that they're descended from the Spartans, while Athens has more than 2 million people. In the long run, Athens won, but in the short run, Sparta won. But anyway, all right, here's what was different about their system of government. In Sparta, it was a military camp. Every man was a soldier. Every man was a soldier from birth. I say if he got lucky enough to turn 6. When a Spartan child was born, his parents were allowed to keep him or her for 1 month. This applied to girls or boys. After 1 month, a Spartan doctor would examine that child. If the child looked healthy, she was allowed to grow up. If the child didn't look healthy, the parents were told to take that child out to a remote area and drop them off and leave them, forsake them. This practice of exposing babies was very, very common in the ancient world, and it did not stop until Christendom took over. Now, folk, to me, this is utterly zany, because how can you tell at 1 month whether that baby is going to be strong or weak? And especially, how can you tell if that baby that looks so weak now might have children and grandchildren who are practically Superman? But they made another huge mistake also, the Spartans did. They felt like they were better than every other Greek, so they told the Greek people, they told the Spartan people, you may not form any friends outside of Sparta. You may not marry anyone but another Spartan. And nobody outside was allowed to form friendships. The Spartan people were discouraged from visiting anywhere else in Greece. Everybody else was discouraged from coming into Sparta. They isolated themselves from the rest of the Greeks because they felt like they were better. But here's where they made a fatal blunder. By continuously marrying inside their own community, they wound up getting generations that turned out to be weaker and weaker and weaker over time due to what we might call inbreeding. If I could go back in time, I'd advise them, hey, tell your men to go pick their wives from places like Scandinavia or Spain or even deep down into Africa or even from far off India. And that way you'll create a race of super warriors. It's called hybrid vigor. One of these on your head, you have some idea what I'm talking about. You'll create a race of super warriors. All right. But they didn't. Instead, they insisted our men and our women are better than anyone else, so our men can only marry our women, etc., etc. Now, military training started at 6. Every Spartan boy was whipped, whether he deserved it or not. Whipped at least in public once a year. This was done to desensitize them. To desensitize the women were expected to march down the streets and dance completely naked in front of everybody. Again, this whole purpose was to make them desensitized, hardened, because warfare, I've already mentioned warfare is very, very brutal. And the Spartans wanted to make sure that their people became adjusted to it. And a Spartan wife would tell her husband when they went into battle, either come back with your shield or on it. On it means dead. But don't ever throw your shield down in battle, because this was considered a disgrace. Later on, an Athenian poet was the question. He said, sure, I threw my shield down in battle. Well, the thing was in the way. Before you think this poet was a coward, he threw his shield down in battle because his side had lost. He saw his side had no chance to win, so he got out of the field. But he got another shield and went back another day and won. But the Spartans, like I said, we don't retreat. We never throw our shields down. We're Spartans. They wound up getting annihilated when they were told to retreat, should have retreated, reorganized, regrouped. But again, it proved in the long run to be their undoing. Anyway, they were a big military camp. And another thing that really hurt their population, their young men were not allowed to live with their wives till they turned 30. Well, what if a Spartan man married at 20? That meant for 10 years he was expected to live in his barracks, and if he ever saw his wife, he had to sneak off at night and then sneak back before he was caught. And if he was caught, of course, he was soundly whipped. This obviously greatly kept down the Spartan population. We later learned there were other factors that kept the Spartan population down also. What happened was the Spartan numbers kept dwindling and dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, owing to the fact that half the men did not survive till they were 20, owing to the extreme military training that killed the men when they were young, men who might have grown up to be really stout, strong warriors, but were killed along the way because of the intense training they underwent, killed or broken. All right, Sparta was a military camp, but then one thing you will notice about Sparta, unlike the other city-states, they never had a coup. They never had a rebellion. It's like the people were programmed from the birth to accept this as the norm. They knew no other way of living. They had no art, no music. No art and no music because they believed these things made a person sissified and soft. Aristotle was way later to put it this way, that the Spartans only try to make their men soldiers, but they wind up not having anything in the way of usefulness to offer because they're not even good soldiers. Be that as it may. Now, the Spartans enslaved their near neighbors called the city of Messenia. Now, believe what you will, folk. The people of Messenia claimed that they were descended from Hercules. Now, if you know anything about Hercules, Hercules married, had a few children, then his family was entirely wiped out. His wife and children all completely wiped out, killed. He married again, and the Messenians claimed that they were descendants from his second marriage. But they became slaves after a while, owing to the fact that they could not match the Spartans. They would revolt from time to time. Eventually, though, now we're going to talk about this later, eventually they revolted and won. and made the Spartans afraid of them. That was because the Spartan population kept going down and down and down, while the Messenian slave population kept going up and up and up. The time came when the Spartans did not have enough numbers to withstand the Messenians. But the Spartans told the Messenians, you grow our crops, you build our houses, our men are nothing but soldiers. Sparta became a military camp. All right. Oh yeah, they did have some democracy. Spartan men could vote at 30, only on issues that the upper classes told them, we don't care which way you vote, just you can vote on these issues. So it was a form of democracy. They did have some of that. They were hardened, and this is a bad mistake they made. No changes allowed. Now, folk, I don't know what would happen if Sparta would have lasted to this day when the military world got hold of tanks and airplanes and rockets. The Spartan method of fighting just simply would not stand up. Let's face it. All right. Now, in the meantime, Athens. Athens started out as a monarchy, but became an aristocracy after time, otherwise an oligarchy. They eventually got rid of their king. I've already mentioned. They started a monarchy, went from there to an oligarchy, and then went from an oligarchy to a tyranny. So they did not follow the pattern that's wrote on the board. It was somewhat reversed. But their history begins with a man named Solon. We wonder what happened before that. There is a legend that before Solon, there was a king named Dracon, and Dracon has been pictured as a snake, but I'm not going to mention him. We don't know if he existed or not. But Solon, we actually have written records written at the time he lived. At the time Solon started his rule, Athens was in trouble. They were on the verge of rebellion. So Solon went to Egypt to find out how he should, from the Egyptian wise men, how he should handle the situation, and he came back. Now here is part of the problem. A lot of your ordinary Athenians would find themselves deep, deep in debt, and they would use, to get more loans, they would use themselves as collateral. In other words, if I can't pay this, I'll be your slave, or I can't pay this, I'll give you my wife as your slave, or if I can't pay, I'll give you my children as slaves. Well, they were using humans as collateral. Also, the rich had gotten almost all the land, and the poor had nothing. Now, this is a problem people have had down through the ages. The rich tend to absorb all the land. Well, the common people begged Solon to do a practice called Syzaxia. I don't know right there, but Syzaxia had been practiced in the Near East, that when a new ruler took over, his first act would be to cancel all debts. And we all start all over now. Well, Solon, after consulting with the Egyptians, he did not do two things. Number one, he did not cancel all debts, and he did not take the land from the rich and redistribute to the poor. I hope this is one of the projects we're going to be thinking about this semester. This has been tried several times. It has never worked, as I mentioned. The Chinese tried it, the Koreans tried it, even south of the border, Mexicans tried it. I don't know where else would try, but Solon would not do it. So Solon upset the poor people because of what he did not do, but Solon also said that all slaves who had been forced to take collateral would be freed. That upset the rich. So basically Solon made enemies on both sides. However, once Solon was gone and Athens enjoyed 50 years of prosperity, Solon was looked on, hey, wasn't things really wonderful while he was around? Wasn't things really, really great while he was alive? They couldn't stand it, but once he was gone, he was looked on as being really, really great because his policies, he stopped the use of collateral, of humans as collateral. There was a man who could not use, he could use furniture as collateral, even horses as collateral if you had a horse, or other farm animals, sheep and goats as collateral, but no humans, no family member. Solon stopped that, and it made the Athenian people become more careful how they got into debt. Like I say, after he was gone, the people of Athens experienced 50 years of prosperity, and they thought this was great. Well, when Solon retired, he didn't die in office, he retired, and the one thing he did not want to happen did happen. A tyrant took over. However, Pisistratus, with all respects, turned out to be a really good tyrant. If any tyrant is good, he ruled the Greeks wisely. Under him, the Greeks enjoyed prosperity. So Solon could hardly have complained. He did not live to see Pisistratus' rule come to an end. Now, Pisistratus tried to establish dynastic rule, something Solon would not have. When he died, he put his son in charge. His son lasted 1 year and then resigned. Realized, hey, I can't handle this. I can't. And not only did he realize it, the people of Athens realized it too. So we can forget about Pisistratus' son. Pisistratus governed for a while. There's a story of a farmer. Pisistratus disguised himself as an ordinary man and went around and met this farmer. And the farmer said to him, I tell you what, if it weren't for Pisistratus, I could make ends meet, but he's going to take everything extra out for taxes. Pisistratus was so moved that he exempted that man from taxes for that year. The man did not know he was talking to Pisistratus himself. This had a lot of kings who will go out and, you might say, do the town disguised as ordinary persons. Believe it or not, the kings have a desire to wonder what it's like to be ordinary. Pisistratus was no exception. All right, anyway, he passed off the scene. Next one was Cleisthenes, and the folk, I believe,